If I asked you to name the absolutely worst year in human history, what would you say? Maybe you would say 1347, the year the Black Death arrived in Europe and wiped out half the population. Maybe you would say 1918, when the flu pandemic ravaged the globe and killed millions. Or perhaps, looking at recent history, you might think of 2020. You would be wrong. Historians and scientists have recently crunched the data, analyzing ancient tree rings, ice cores drilled from deep within glaciers, and crumbling scrolls written by terrified monks, and they have come to a frightening consensus. There is one year that stands alone, a year so terrifying, so bleak, and so hopeless that it literally reset the trajectory of human civilization. That year is 536 AD. It was the year the sun disappeared, not for an hour, not for a day during an eclipse, but for 18 long, agonizing months. It was the year winter never ended. It was the year the greatest empires on Earth began to crumble, not because of war or politics, but because the sky itself turned against them. If you thought the year without a summer in 1816 was bad, buckle up, because 536 wasn't just a bad year. It was the beginning of the Dark Ages in the most literal sense possible. And the scariest part is that for centuries, we had absolutely no idea why it happened, until now. This is the story of the day the light went out. Imagine you were a farmer living in the Byzantine Empire, or maybe a merchant in ancient China. It is early spring, the world is relatively stable. The Roman Empire, though changed, is still powerful under Emperor Justinian. Life is hard, but it is predictable. The sun rises, the crops grow, and the sun sets. But one morning, something is wrong. You walk outside, and the sun is there, but it looks broken. Instead of a blinding golden orb that warms your skin, it looks like a pale blue moon. You can look directly at it without hurting your eyes. It gives off no heat, it casts no shadows on the ground. A Roman politician named Cassiodorus wrote about this exact moment. He described a bluish sun and noted that people marveled to see no shadows of their bodies at noon. He wrote that the sun had lost its wonted light. At first, people were just confused. Then they were concerned. But as the weeks turned into months, concern turned to absolute terror. The fog didn't lift. It was a dry, mysterious veil that covered the entire northern hemisphere. It wasn't a rain cloud, it was something else, and it was blocking out the heat. By summer, the temperature plummeted. In China, historical records tell us that snow fell in August. In Mesopotamia, the crops turned white and died in the fields. In Ireland, the chronicles simply describe a failure of bread. This wasn't just a cold snap. It was a global famine. Without sunlight, the wheat couldn't ripen. The grapes withered on the vine. The feed for livestock died, which meant the cows and horses starved, which meant there was no meat. The sophisticated supply chains of the ancient world began to snap. In Constantinople, the capital of the world, the price of grains skyrocketed. The poor began to starve in the streets, but the darkness was just the opening act. The cold and the hunger were about to invite a much deadlier guest to the party. The descriptions from the time are the stuff of nightmares. The historian Procopius lived through it in Constantinople. He wrote that at its peak, the plague was killing 10,000 people every single day in the city alone. 10,000 a day. There was no room to bury the dead. The graveyards were full. The roofs of towers were removed and bodies were simply thrown inside until the towers were filled to the brim with rotting corpses. Ships were filled with the dead and pushed out to sea, only to drift back to shore, bringing the smell of death back to the city. The emperor himself, Justinian, caught the plague. He survived, but his empire did not. Plague is estimated to have killed between 30 and 50 million people. That was nearly half the world's population at the time. And historians now believe this pandemic was a direct result of the cooling event of 536. The sudden climate change forced rodents in Africa to migrate closer to human settlements in search of food, carrying the fleas with them. The cold preserved the bacteria. The famine weakened the humans. It was a perfect storm of biological destruction. But for over 1,000 years, a mystery remained. We knew what happened. We knew the sun dimmed, we knew the cold came, but nobody knew why. Was it a curse from God? Was it the sun dying? It wasn't until the 21st century that modern science finally solved the cold case of the 6th century. To solve this mystery, scientists didn't look at old books, they looked at ice. In a project led by the University of Maine and researchers from Switzerland, a team drilled deep into a glacier in the Swiss Alps. They extracted an ice core, a long cylinder of frozen history. Ice is like a time capsule. Every year, snow falls and traps dust, pollen, and chemicals from the atmosphere. By counting the layers, scientists can look at the exact chemical composition of the air in any given year. When they reached the layer for the year 536, they found something shocking: volcanic glass, microscopic shards of tephra. The chemical fingerprint was unmistakable. There had been a volcanic eruption, but not just any eruption. This was a cataclysm. Initially, they thought it was a volcano in North America, but newer evidence points to an eruption in Iceland or possibly the Ilopango volcano in El Salvador. Whatever the source, the explosion was titanic. It ejected millions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. When sulfur dioxide hits the stratosphere, it mixes with water vapor and turns into sulfuric acid aerosol. This creates a massive reflective shield. It works like a mirror, reflecting the sun's energy back into space before it can hit the Earth. This is what caused the blue sun. The entire planet was wrapped in a blanket of sulfuric acid fog. But the ice cores revealed something even scarier. It wasn't just one eruption. The ice showed another massive spike in volcanic ash in the year 540 and another one in 547. It was a triple tap, 3 massive volcanic events in the span of 11 years. The Earth didn't stand a chance. The first eruption knocked humanity down, the second one kicked us while we were bleeding, and the third one ensured we wouldn't get up for a century. This period is now called the Late Antique Little Ice Age. It cooled the planet for decades. The chaos of 536 didn't just kill people, it changed the map of the world. In Mongolia, the grasslands froze. The Rouran Khaganate, a powerful nomadic empire, collapsed because their horses couldn't graze. This created a vacuum that allowed a new group to rise, the Turks. If not for that volcanic winter, the history of Asia would look completely different today. In Peru, the Moche civilization, famous for their pyramids and gold, faced devastating weather patterns. The cooling disrupted the El Niño cycle, leading to decades of drought, followed by massive floods. Their society, which had lasted for centuries, began to crumble into civil war and collapse. In Scandinavia, the impact was perhaps the most culturally significant. The darkness and the Fimbulwinter, the mighty winter, devastated the Norse populations. Archaeologists in Sweden have found almost 75% of villages from this period were abandoned. This trauma was so deep that it likely birthed the legend of Ragnarok. You know the story. The Norse apocalypse starts with a winter that lasts for 3 years, where the sun is swallowed by a wolf and brother turns against brother. That isn't just a myth. That is a cultural memory of the year 536. The Vikings were remembering the time the sun actually died. Even the legend of King Arthur might be linked to this. The idea of a wasteland where crops fail and the kingdom falls into darkness fits perfectly with the reality of 6th century Britain. The gold, the silver, and the hoards of treasure found by metal detectorists from this era tell a sad story. People buried their wealth, hoping to come back for it when the sun returned. They never came back. So why does this matter to us in 2026? We have iPhones, artificial intelligence, and nuclear power. We aren't subsistence farmers in the Byzantine Empire. A volcano can't hurt us, right? Wrong. Actually, we are more vulnerable now than they were back then. In 536, if the supply chain broke, a village could still try to hunt or forage. Today, our cities hold only about 3 days worth of food. Our entire civilization relies on satellites for navigation, on global shipping for medicine, and on a stable climate for agriculture. If a volcano the size of the 536 event happened today, it wouldn't just mean a cold summer. The sulfur cloud would disrupt satellite communications. Global agriculture would fail simultaneously. We rely on just-in-time delivery. There are no stockpiles massive enough to feed 8 billion people through a 2-year winter. The panic would be instantaneous. The stock markets would crash to zero. The power grids, strained by the cold, would fail. We often think of the end of the world as a nuclear war or a zombie outbreak, but history tells us the real threat is much quieter. It's just a bit of dust in the sky, a change in the opacity of the atmosphere, a few degrees of cooling. The story of 536 is a reminder of how thin the line is between civilization and chaos. We live on a planet that is alive, violent, and indifferent to our plans. The sun is not a guarantee, it is a gift, and as the people of the 6th century learned the hard way, that gift can be taken away in a single afternoon. The next time you complain about a rainy day or a summer that feels a bit too hot, remember the year 536. Remember the generations that lived and died in the twilight. Remember the fog that smelled of sulfur and death. We survived it. Humanity is resilient.
We climbed out of the darkness, rebuilt our empires, and eventually, we even learned how to fly above the clouds. But the volcanoes are still there, waiting. The Tambora eruption in 1815 gave us a year without a summer. The 536 eruption gave us a decade of darkness. Geologically speaking, we are due for another reminder of who is really in charge of this planet. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and 536 is a rhyme we hopefully never have to hear again. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the darkest year in history, you might be wondering about the other time the weather tried to kill us. I actually made a video about the year 1816, which was like a younger sibling to the disaster of 536. You can watch that right here. And I have a question for you. If this happened today, if the sun didn't rise tomorrow, what is the first thing you would do? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we are just scratching the surface of history's buried secrets. I'll see you in the next one. Stay warm.